will need to raise your hand with that raise your hand option, and I will have our host, Devon Daniel, will enable you to speak. Okay, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to Tom.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. By the way, Devon?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here and coordinating this thing.
No problem at all.
All right, let's go ahead and call the roll, if you would, Kathy.
Okay, U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
Actually, you know what? Let's do this. You can see who's attending, correct?
I can.
Yeah, but the minute taker may not. Okay, I'm sorry. Just, let's go ahead and proceed. Yeah.
No, yeah. Okay, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Florida DEP.
Ed Kennedy here.
Florida DOT.
Yes, Ann's present.
The Department of Interior. Florida Fish and Wildlife.
Tom Reinert, present.
Okay, FDAX.
Rebecca Elliott is here.
South Florida Water Management District.
Justin Nolte is present.
Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council.
Jessica Seymour is present.
Martin County.
Harold Jenkins and John are here.
Town of Jupiter. Village of Tequesta. Palm Beach County.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Jupiter Inlet District.
Tom Howard here.
Can Palm Beach County state their name?
Oh, I apologize. Maria Marino, County Commissioner, Palm Beach County.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Loxahatchee River District. Okay, South Indian River Water Control District. Mike, you're on mute. North Palm Beach County Improvement District. Mike Dillon is here. I see him.
Jonathan is here for Northern Palm Beach
Okay.
County Improvement District.
Jonathan Ricketts, thank you. Florida Farm Bureau.
Good afternoon. Gary Ritter's here with the Florida Farm Bureau.
Okay. City of Palm Beach Gardens, we don't have a person. And Local River User Group, we don't have a person. Palm Beach County Environmental Conservation Group, Herb Zeba. Is Herb on? I don't see him. Martin County Environmental Conservation Group, Dick Roberts. I don't see Dick. Landowner rep, Pat McGrogan. I don't see Pat. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We do have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Kathy. We have a set of minutes proposed for the meeting of February 22nd, 2021. We have a written recommended change by Mr. Reinert that he was present, and we also have a second proposed change to the minutes of the February 22nd meeting. Why don't we consider the three as one?
Okay, and Tom, just so you know, there was some more changes from Marion Hedgepeth. I just didn't have time to put them in before the meeting, so I can send them out. I was thinking Dick was supposed to be on here, so to talk about him, but he's not.
That's not my dog, by the way.
No, it's mine. I'm sorry. The lawn guy's here as
That's
usual.
okay. Well, I don't want the council members considering changes without at least seeing them or hearing them. How lengthy are they from Marion?
They're just like in a whole bunch of different pages. So this would be my suggestion is I can make those changes and then send it out and I'll just approve it at the next meeting.
Yeah, let's do this. Let's go ahead and pass this agenda item to the next meeting. Anybody object to that? Anybody object to that? No, hearing no objection, we'll just go and pass this on to the next meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do we have any members of the public who wish to make any comment? By the way, I'm going to break with tradition, I suppose, a little bit. If any member wants to make a comment on an item that is being discussed, in my opinion, you should feel free to do so. You are not necessarily limited to this very moment of the meeting, because if you have something that we're going to be talking about, you want to comment on, then please do so. Having said that, does anybody from the public have any comment?
Wait a minute. I see Herb. I just went to the public. Herb is on the public side. So I see that Herb is here. I apologize for cutting in. So is Andrew. Andrew Eastwick. Who else? You guys got special panelist invitations, which is what you needed to put on so that you could be part of the discussion.
Kathy,
But
I can
that's
move them
two
over.
more.
I can move them over to a panelist if you like.
Okay, Herb, did you want to say something?
Yes, I had a bunch of comments on the minutes. Is there somebody I can send them to?
Yeah, send them to me, Herb. Send them to me.
Okay, that was the question. Thank you.
Are there any comments or questions from the public? All right, Don Medler, are you available to talk to us about the revisions to the minimum flow and level?
I am.
Would you proceed for us, please?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Oh my God.
All right, can everybody see the screen? The presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Don Medell, and I'm a principal scientist with the Coastal Ecosystem Section in the Applied Sciences Bureau. And just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to talk today. Just to kind of give you an outline and overview of what I'm going to discuss today in this presentation, I'm going to give you a background on some of the water resource protection tools that we have at the Water Management District and how they relate to water use permitting. We're going to discuss a little bit about the letters that we got from the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee, and then dive in a little bit about the MFL monitoring and compliance data, and then talk about continued monitoring for the river as it relates to the MFL, talk about the SERP restoration plan, and then in the end, we'll talk about next steps, including trying to get some feedback from you as the stakeholders, and what we plan to do next. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just jump into this, and then as you all want to give us some feedback, we certainly welcome that. All right, I'm trying to advance here. There we go. There's a little bit of a delay. Just so you have an idea a little bit about our water resource protection tools, we have 3 that we typically use and associate with rural development, and that is the minimum flows and minimum water levels. We also have water reservations and restricted allocation area rules. And all three are adopted by rule in the Florida Administrative Code as we go through the rule development process. So I want to make sure you have an overview and how these relate to the consumptive use permitting process. So on the far left of this diagram, when an applicant submits a water use application, they have to meet all of the general consumptive use permit rules that we have on the books. And so there are a lot of rules regarding protecting existing legal users, making sure contamination plumes, there's wetland protection criteria and things of that nature. We also have water shortage rules, and then we have MFLs, water reservations, and restricted allocation areas. And I'm going to, through my presentation and discussion, refer to minimum flows and minimum levels as MFLs, just so you all know. And my focus in the presentation today is really going to be on the three that you see in red to the right. And so that's where we're going to focus on, and I'll incorporate a little bit about the water shortage rules just so you have an understanding. But all of these, before a permit is issued, all of these criteria have to be met. So I want to make sure you all have an idea of how these things relate to the consumptive use permitting process. So where do we get our statutory authority? It comes from Chapter 373. And specifically, we have defined in 40E-8. 40E-8 is our minimum flows and levels rules that we have. And it is described as the point at which further withdrawals would cause significant harm to the water resources or the ecology of an area. And significant harm is specifically defined in our rules in 40E-8. Unlike some of the other water management districts, there is no definition of significant harm. Our district does have a definition of significant harm, and it's defined as the temporary loss of water resource functions that take 2 or more years to recover, but is less serious or less severe than serious harm. And I have an overview that'll kind of explain that in a little more detail here in a bit. And then when we deal with MFLs, we're not only dealing with surface waters, but also dealing with groundwater and protection of our important aquifers. So dealing with MFL recovery and prevention strategies, just so you have a little background about MFLs in general. All of our MFLs in our district, we have, like 40 different compliance points for all of our MFLs. And for MFLs that are not currently meeting the MFL criteria at the time of adoption, we adopt what's called a recovery strategy. And that strategy is basically designed to achieve recovery of the MFL as soon as practicable. And so it may include a lot of things, and not only restricting consumptive uses. It may include water reservations. It may include restricted allocation area rules, anything that's designed to minimize the impact on the resources to try and get us back to recover the MFL and get it to where it's meeting the MFL criteria. That's part of the recovery strategy. As you well know, many of our MFLs in the South Florida Water Management District have been heavily impacted and influenced by the Central and South Florida Flood Control project, and that is the system of canals that we have and conveyance systems that are more than 2,200 miles long, and that has had a major effect on many of our MFLs. And so as a result of that, those alterations that occurred, we have the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan to address a lot of the recovery strategies for not only the North Fork of the St. Lucie River, or excuse me, Northwest Fork of the Loxahatchee River, but also Everglades, Lake Okeechobee, the Loxahatchee River, just to name a few. On the other hand, for prevention strategy, those are water bodies that are currently meeting the MFL, but are not expected to meet it in 20 years. And so we have what's called a prevention strategy to try and maintain through regulatory or some operation criteria that we try to make sure that the MFL is met. So I just wanted to explain that fundamental difference between recovery versus prevention strategy. To give you an idea of prevention strategy, water bodies are like Lake Istapoga, the St. Lucie Estuary, just to name a couple. All right. So with that, I'm going to go and explain this conceptual model. This conceptual framework is actually contained in our MFL rule, so which is in 40E-8 Florida Administrative Code. So this top portion of this graphic that you see in the middle, there is a no harm. Can you see my cursor? Can you all see my cursor or not? Yay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So at the top, you see there is a no harm standard. And so above that line, we are issuing consumptive use permits. So this is our water that we're permitting on a regular basis when they meet all of the criteria I addressed earlier in the previous slide. And water reservations as well as restricted allocation areas are at this or done at this no harm standard. And we usually have normal operations and environmental restoration. But once you get below this line, you start getting, as water levels on the left-hand side, these are decreasing water levels. So as we go down this graphic, the water levels are continuing to decrease. And as we start to experience harm in the water resources, that's like a temporary loss that takes less than 1 to 2 years to recover the harm. We move into phase 1 and 2 water shortage implementation. And so when that harm does start to occur, we're starting to see like a drought condition occurring. And so as the water levels continue to decrease, we start to see as a severe drought condition. This is where MFLs come into play. And the MFLs are designed to be protective of significant harm of the water resources. And we've defined it here as, water resource functions that take multiple years to recover. And when this severe drought condition occurs, we're moving into a phase 3 shortage. And just so you have an idea about what these phases of water shortage mean, when there is a phase 1 water shortage implemented, existing legal users are cut back 15%. In a phase 2, they're cut back 30%. And when we get into the significant harm, existing legal users are actually cut back 45% of their permitted allocation. So it's pretty significant. And usually we will look at a number of different things before the governing board goes into implementing any water shortage orders. And so as the severity of the drought continues and water levels continue to decrease, we move into the serious harm condition. And when that happens, we really have permanent or irreversible loss of water resource functions. And we also move in and implement what would be called the phase 4 water shortage restrictions, where there was a 60% cutback in existing legal users. So I just want to make sure I gave you the overall framework associated with how MFLs fit into this harm and this overall conceptual model. So the northwest fork of the Loxahatchee River, we've been talking about, Chad brought it up the last meeting. There was the potential for rule development. We had received 2 letters from the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee. And so, I guess the first question is, why would we even consider it? Because of these letters, the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee, for those of you who do not know, they are a standing committee of the Florida legislature who reviews all of the rules to ensure statewide consistency of all rules throughout the state, and also those pertaining to MFLs. So when we received these 2 letters, one was on July 23rd, 2015, the other one's on 2016, They specifically asked us to go back and make the rules consistent with section 373.042 parens 1A. And that specifically talks about a minimum flow being either a flow or a minimum water level, not a measure of salinity. So, and those three water bodies are the Northwest Fork of the Loxahatchee River, the Caloosahatchee River, as well as Florida Bay, because all three of those rules at the time that we received these letters from JAPSI, criteria as a measure of significant harm. So we went forward on the 2020 priority list, which was approved by the governing board on October 8th of last year, to clarify the MFL as a flow rather than a measure of salinity for these two water bodies, Northwest Fork of the Loxahatchee River, as well as Florida Bay. Now you're asking, well, in the bullet before, we talked about three water bodies. Why is it only two now? And the reason for that is at the time we received these letters from the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee, we were actually in rule development for the Caloosahatchee River MFL. And that rule was adopted in 2019, at the end of 2019. And through a very long process, we did finally get the rule reevaluated, and the salinity criteria was actually not part of the MFL at that time to basically comport with what JAPSI was requesting. So what we want to do as part of this meeting today is seek some stakeholder input about the salinity criteria prior to going into the rule development process. So we wanted to get your feedback, and so I've got some options that I'll get to in just a little bit. So I just want to kind of move forward into a little bit of the MFL criteria itself, just so you all have an understanding of what's involved with the MFL rule. So I'm going to kind of go through this, and just so you have an idea, every MFL rule basically has three different components. It has a flow, a magnitude component, so either a flow or a stage. It also has a return frequency component and a duration component. So all MFLs basically have those three components. But in this case, for the Northwest Fork of the Loxahatchee River, it's an enhanced freshwater regime is necessary within the Northwest Fork of the Loxahatchee River to prevent significant harm. And so that's specifically in the rule. All of this is straight from the 40E-8. An MFL occurs when the Northwest Fork of the Loxahatchee River, when an exceedance is defined in paragraph C, occurs more than once in a 6-year period. So that 6-year period is the return frequency that I just mentioned. And then it goes into detail about what's an MFL exceedance for the river. And it's one of two things. Either the flow over Langhart Dam declines below 35 CFS for more than 20 consecutive days, or the average salinity concentration expressed as says 20-day rolling average exceeds 2 parts per thousand at river mile 9.1. And then the last component of this rule really talks about that the MFL is intended to achieve partial enhancement to prevent significant harm, and restoration will be addressed as part of the recovery strategy. And that's what that reference is there in 40E-8.421 parent 6. That is the recovery strategy for the Northwest Fork of the Loxahatchee River. So with that, I'm going to go into a little bit about compliance data. This is our MFL flow compliance data, and you can see there's violations. The MFL was adopted originally in 2003. We've had several MFL violations because of the flow, and the exceedances are the point at which it goes below. You can see the gray throughout this graphic here, and so there's been a number of violations and exceedances, and the same is true with the salinity criteria. Once it goes above 2, or excuse me, below the two. In this case, you can see the red triangles, again, salinity criteria. And a lot of these, you know, like I said, the rule is either a flow or a measure of salinity. So either one could trip it and make it a violation. So a number of violations have occurred. You know, the district through its operations has really tried to make sure when we have regional water available to try and send water to the Loxahatchee River, either from Lake Okeechobee. In the past, you know, the main vehicle, we tried developed what's called in 2011, a pilot project to test the facilities using the L8 reservoir facility. And at that time, in the 2007 drought, we were able to successfully test our facilities and move water from Lake Okeechobee all the way to the northwest fork of the Loxahatchee River. And that course was 28 miles to get the water from Lake Okeechobee all the way to the river. And it took a lot of manpower, a lot of pumping to get it there. And that actually goes through Grassy Waters Preserve through the structures. We have the G61 and G60 structures, as you, I'm sure, are familiar with. And so, and recently, you know, our staff have been working with the city of West Palm Beach to try and get more water from Grassy Waters Preserve delivered through the C18 canal to the northwest fork of the Loxahatchee River as well. So we've tried to do these operational implement these operational changes as best we can with the regional water available, recognizing that, you know, as we've stated in many of our regional water supply plans, that violations, you know, exceedances and violations are expected to occur until the recovery strategy associated with recovery strategy are fully constructed and operational. So we try to minimize that when we have regional water available, but we recognize that we don't have all the facilities and plumbing in place to actually provide the water that the river needs to meet the MFL criteria. So regarding future monitoring, you know, salinity monitoring at mile marker 9.1 is expected to continue in the future, even if we did go, you know, into rural development to look at, you know, clarifying the MFL as a flow rather than a measure of salinity. We would still continue to monitor 9.1 because, as you all know, it's a very important monitoring station to really understand what's going on with salinity, as well as the floodplain habitat and where the mangroves are starting to encroach because of River Mile 9.1 and 8.1, where Kitchening Creek is coming in. Somewhere in that realm is where the fresh water stops and the mangrove dominated communities start. And so we recognize that this is a very important indicator to assess significant harm, and we anticipate still continuing to monitor that, even if the salinity criteria were changed later. And of course, the flow would continue to monitor. We would continue to monitor that at Langhart Dam. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go into the Loxahatchee River watershed restoration project that was recently approved, and give you an update on what's going on with that. So as you well know, the study area is about 480,000 acres. It's historically dominated by, you know, wetlands and slough systems, and you know, the current land use is you know, not only natural open land and water, but also, you know, there's a lot of development associated with that and infrastructure associated with you know, the Central and South Florida flood control system, as you well know. So as I go through these slides, you'll notice there's 3 different flowways, and I'll kind of go through, I have some other figures to kind of show these same, but these 3 flowways are going to continue through as a theme through these slides so that you can stay focused on those as well. So what are the project objectives associated with this watershed restoration plan? It's restore the flows of the Loxahatchee River, the Northwest Fork, enhance the vegetative communities for the Loxahatchee River estuary, and then increase the spatial extent and function of the remaining natural areas and restore the watershed connections, sheet flow, and natural flow of water across the landscape, and then restore the abundance and diversity of native plant and animal species. So those are the overall project objectives. And the authorized plan is alternative 5R. This is the tentatively selected plan. And there are 3 different flowways, as I referenced earlier. Flowway 1 is using the M1 pump station through the G161 and G60 structures into Grassy Waters Preserve. And there's Flowway 2, which includes a 9,500 acre reservoir in the C18 basin that's at Mecca Farms, and along with 4 ASR wells. Flowway 3 is the Palmar East and Cypress Creek restoration and flow through marsh at, along with Moonshine and Kitchenine Creeks. An estimated whopping cost of $741 million, which is a large cost, and a lot of that cost is associated with the reservoir and the ASR wells and doing all these other components. So this is the overall map that shows these different components and what's happening. So if you have questions about any of these, if you're not familiar with what's going on, I'm not going to go through all 10 of these, but if you have specific questions, I can certainly go through and kind of answer your questions about any of these 10 components. But I think most of you are familiar with this Flowway 1 down here. This is where we went through the M Canal, and I referenced earlier that there was a, back in 2011, a pilot study done to send water from Lake Okeechobee this way through the Tieback Canal, the M Canal, and then ultimately into Grassy Waters Preserve and up this way to the Loxahatchee River. And again, that was a 28 mile conveyance course to take the water. So it was, but we did it just to test the facilities to see if it could be done. And yes, in fact, we could do it. And but as part of this plan, they've tried to improve the flows to try and shorten the flows to make sure that the creek, we have more than one option to send water, which is a good thing. So again, getting back to the project benefits itself, the Northwest Fork, what we're trying to do is get targeted flows to 91% of the time during the dry season and 98% during the wet season, and then promote recovery of the riverine freshwater species and the estuarine zones for fish and protected species downstream. And then we're also, and so just so you know what those targeted restoration flows are, we're trying to have a variable dry season flow between 50 and 110 CFS with a mean monthly flow, greater than 69 CFS at Lanehart Dam. And then during the wet season, have a flow of greater than 110 CFS for more than 120 days. So those are the targets that were specifically worked on and evaluated during the project implementation process. And so a lot of these other former ag lands that you see here that we see where we're going to improve watershed hydrology, the former ag lands, there are 17,000 of existing and former ag land, and a lot of that is 9 Gems, Gulfstream, citrus, it was a former citrus grove, Culpeper Ranch, and then changes to restoring the wetland hydrology and filling ditches within many of these natural areas to try and improve connectivity and the sheet flow of water across the landscape, as I indicated before. And then, there's supposed to be some, some additional recreational opportunities there as well. Hopefully, with the water being higher and a longer duration in many of the tributaries, we'll see some opportunities for expanded recreational opportunities there as well. So just to give you an update on the status, release of the final project implementation report occurred in January 2020. The chief's report, the chief being the Army Corps of Engineers chief, signed it on April 2020. And the project was authorized in the 2020 Water Resources Development Act. And what we expect to have happen this year is the Corps is going to initiate Flowway 3, some preliminary engineering activities, geotech work, some surveying to really support the design, because that information is really critical as we go forward with the design. So that's where we are. This figure I wanted to show you because what it does is two things. There's and let me just explain this in detail for you, because I know there's a lot of information on this figure, but there is a restricted allocation area rule that covers the lion's share of this watershed protection project for the Lox River. So if you look at this legend, you'll see the watershed restricted allocation area. So all the pink is areas that's part of that restricted allocation area rule, and the portion of 5R that is also within that restricted allocation area rule is shown in purple. Okay, so where you see the purple is part of the project that is protected for the SERP project. Okay, so what's not protected is the light blue area. So you'll see this area right here in the middle. This is the 9,500 acre reservoir area that's not protected, along with some of these other components throughout the project. Those are the areas that are not protected. And so the goal when we get ready to enter into a project partnership agreement with the Corps is to make sure that we have those areas legally protected before we move forward with the project. And that is a requirement before we enter into a project partnership agreement, and that many times drives our rule development process. So with that, some of the next steps, we have some options for the stakeholders' consideration, for your consideration today regarding the salinity criteria. Is, do we keep the existing salinity criteria in the rule? Do we consider changes to the salinity criteria but continue monitoring? Or do we reevaluate the salinity criteria once the restoration flows are achieved? In other words, once the SERP project is completed, constructed, and fully operational, and we have a little bit of lag time there before we start seeing the benefits, do we reevaluate the salinity criteria at that time? So we'd like to receive some impact or some input from you all today on that. Also, we have still yet to determine the legal process for protecting that water. That's the blue areas, the light blue areas I showed you in the previous slide. So we're looking at a couple of different options, either water reservation or restricted allocation area rule. We've started having meetings about that. And so we aren't sure which tool we're going to use yet at this point, but we are having those discussions as we go forward. And then, like I indicated, before we enter into a project partnership agreement, we have to have the rule fully adopted to protect all those areas. And the construction associated with this SERP project isn't expected until about 2024. And that would be, obviously after we receive congressional congressional funding for the project. The congressional authorization has already happened. So we still need to have congressional appropriation or funding for the project to occur. And we likely won't need rule development until around 2023, 2022 in that time frame. And like I said, we're having those discussions about the pros and cons about which water resource tool we will use, either water reservation or restricted allocation area rule. So with that, that concludes my presentation. So I'd like to receive some feedback or questions that you all have, and I'll do my best to answer them, and I look forward to getting your feedback.
All right, thank you. Thank you very
Don.
much. Kathy,
Herb has a question, Tom. Herb has his hand up. Herb, you can speak now. You're on the,
hold on just a second, Kathy. I want to give everybody an opportunity to speak, but before we turn it over to the council members, can you, Kathy, make sure that you get a copy of this presentation and send it out to all of the members, please?
I will make sure she gets a copy of that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sure.
Herb, you have a question? Herb,
well,
you-
he took his hand down. He took his hand down.
I forgot to unmute myself.
Oh,
So anyway, I guess the concern I have about eliminating the salinity from the minimum flow level, which I think should not be done, period, until we've got restoration flows coming down when we can reevaluate a lot of things. The MFL, other than that, the flow MFL is so weak that it is practically useless. Under the NFL is currently written in the flow portion, you could send zero water down the Loxahatchee River over the Lanehart Dam for 20 days, then send 35 CFS over for 1 day, and you could repeat that indefinitely. And you destroy the river, but you'd never violate that portion of the MFL. And the only way you know you're doing damage is by that salinity point. And so I think it's totally invalid to think that you can eliminate salinity from this MFL and not do damage unless you change the way you've written the flow portion. Thank you.
Any other council member? If nobody has any questions, let me go ahead and toss a couple out there. Are you looking for an answer or a recommendation on those three alternatives today?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of get your feedback on that so that, I can discuss with, it doesn't have to be today, but certainly would be helpful to get it within, a couple weeks. And so I can take that information back to our executive management team and our legal team and discuss that internally.
So I don't think we have a meeting until when, June, Kathy? Or are we having a special meeting in April?
no, we have a meeting in June.
Well, I mean,
in the future, when the council is asked to pass judgment on something, we would like to have a bit of advance notice.
well, if you guys want to take until June to discuss this issue, I think that's fine. We just would like to, receive it sooner rather than later, obviously, so we can move forward. If we need to go to rural development, that we can kind of move forward in that regard, because it's going to take, 6 months at least to probably get through the rural development process. And really what JAPSI is requesting is that we clarify the MFL as a flow rather than a measure of salinity. Like I indicated in the monitoring slide, we will continue to monitor the salinity. That will not change because we recognize that it's an important indicator for measuring significant harm for the resource.
Right, before I ask any other questions, does any council member have any question or any comment about the question being put to us? And be sure to unmute before you speak. Nobody has any comment?
Jonathan, all you have to do is unmute to speak. You don't have to put your hands up.
Okay, great.
That's-
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, Tom, I would agree. It would be nice to do a little more homework on the subject before we try to take a final vote, because I think obviously the devil is in the details. And I think it would behoove us to try to do a little homework before we came to a conclusion.
I too agree that before we make any changes from where we are now, that we have a compelling reason to do so, or at least, and I haven't heard any argument either way. Well, I have. Herb's argument is valid. I've not heard any argument to the contrary, but I'm not sure that everybody's had an opportunity to consider this issue. I would prefer that we pass it on to June. Don, is there any more information you can give us to help us make this decision?
What do you need?
I guess a whole lot more background. I guess what we'll do then is we'll look at your PowerPoint presentation and follow up with looking at the rules and that kind of thing. I don't have those things in front of me right now.
Well, we can certainly get you the presentation, and if you need more information, by all means, feel free to ask me for it. The up-to-date monitoring compliance data is in the presentation, and again, the way that the rule is written, it's an or situation, so it's either looking at flows or salinity as an exceedance or violation. So you just have to keep that in mind and we have all that data programmed into scripts so that we can see exactly when exceedances and violations occur for the MFL.
Well, give me, for example, even if you don't believe in it, what is the argument to dropping the salinity criteria?
Well, what JAPC has indicated is that, because they're looking at all the MFL rules statewide, and apparently none of the other water management districts are using salinity as a measure of significant harm. And so their concern is significant harm should be measured as a flow or a stage to comport with the statute, the chapter 373.042. And so that's what JAPC is saying, is that the rules as they are written now are not consistent with the statute.
Okay. Does any council member have any question or comment?
Yes, Tom Reiner,
Go
if
ahead.
I may.
Thank you.
Lower my hand too while I'm at it. So I'd like maybe thinking about this, Don, you've already gone through this process in the Loxahatchee, and can you clarify that was in order to remove salinity as the measure in the Loxahatchee? And how did you do that? Because salinity is so important in the Loxahatchee in terms of oyster growth and seagrass vegetation. So so I would ask that, how could the lessons you've learned in the Loxahatchee be applied here? And then there has to be modeling that basically translates flow to, at the Lanehart Dam, so where we're measuring it, to a salinity point downstream. And if we craft that flow metric, not as a average running as a running average rather than an average over the month, to try to address Herb's concerns that you don't let any water through and then you send a bunch at once and now you've got that super high volume that you dump creates an quote unquote average that meets the criteria, but you've screwed the estuary for 20 days. So can you kind of address those concepts?
Well, first of all, just so you all understand, it certainly isn't the district's intent to do operations to, impact any of our water resources. That certainly is not our goal. We try to provide water where it's needed in the various MFLs. But it's a good question, Tom, and the way that we dealt with it on the Loxahatchee River is at that time we had a lot of really robust science. In fact, we had probably 8 years of science as we evaluated and went forward reevaluating the MFL for the Loxahatchee River. And so we met with stakeholders and went over all of that science and what does it mean to the river and what are these biological indicators that we're using to measure significant harm, and how are they affected by flows, and how are they affected by salinity. And we looked at all of that, and ultimately for the Loxahatchee River, we ended up doing that comparison and looked at the dry season flows as well as the wet season flows. And ultimately we ended up taking out the salinity criteria, but in its place, we used those biological indicators as indicators of significant harm to the water resources based on the inflow at S79. And so it was through a slightly different lens, but again, looking at what the resource was sensitive to, and those biological indicators are what we're monitoring on a regular and routine basis now since the MFL was approved. And so like Ethioplankton, which are like, floating larvae, fish larvae, as well as zooplankton species, monitoring that throughout the riverine system, the Loxahatchee in this case. And so we're doing a very robust monitoring. And then what we're doing is, comparing that with, since the reservoir is now under construction for the C43 reservoir for the Loxahatchee, and that is the recovery strategy for the river, we wanted to get an idea of what are those biological indicators doing now. And then after the reservoir comes in line to see what's the biological response of those indicators once the reservoir comes online and you have those restoration flows. So that's how we approached it and tackled that issue. And the stakeholders were, were a bit resistant. I won't deny that. In fact, we went to a rule challenge about that because of some of their concerns. And but ultimately they agreed that, measuring the ecological indicators that are sensitive to those freshwater flows is the way to go. And so that's ultimately what got approved in the rule.
Unfortunately, I don't think we have a very robust oyster population that would allow us to use, say, the oysters as a monitoring. But I'll stop there. But we'd have to find something.
And oysters, Tom, just so you know, really weren't a good indicator in the Loxahatchee River because they were so far downstream. They weren't really an indicator of what's going on, with the changes in salinity and things of that nature, because It was really the indicators that were further upstream that were much more important and valuable for us evaluating the resources.
Was that SAV? What were those?
SAV was one, zooplankton, Ethioplankton, and then we're also evaluating, a freshwater clam in the upper estuary. And so all of those are being evaluated as part of this effort, as looking at the biological indicators of the system. But very good question.
Any other questions?
Yes, this is Chad Kennedy with DEP. I guess first I had a comment because the Water Management District, this Joint Administrative Procedures Committee, this is not like an optional exercise. Is that correct, Don?
It's the district that decides whether or not we're going to go forward with the rule development. So In the case of the Loxahatchee, we are already in rural development, so we decided to go ahead and comport with what JAPSI was looking for. But you know, I think there are some options here that we can consider and take back to our executive management staff and governing board, and then kind of go from there.
Okay, and if the water management district does decide to move forward with this, similar to the Loxahatchee, it'll be a process, and people will have an opportunity to get into the weeds and the science, and also make their comments in a public forum, right?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that a lot of the science that's already been done is when the MFL was adopted, and a lot of the watershed, restoration plans that we've updated periodically, and the PIR was all based on that science. So the science is pretty much what we're moving forward with for the recovery strategy for the river. But what we would need is additional science when we get to the point of reevaluating the MFL after the recovery strategy is completed, is making sure that we look at everything again with a fresh lens with those restoration flows. So we would need more science at that time.
I guess Herb's comment, I think a lot of the council members would echo his concern about the current operations, which I know that you're not involved in the operations as far as that's the control room, and they do, that's a different silo of the water management district. And I guess the concern is that we're seeing people that are watching the river are seeing these flows made on a weekend for recreational users and that type of thing, but then during the week that the flows stop, and that's been reported. And the Loxahatchee River District has very good records of that, and it's causing a problem. And that activity or that management seems to continue despite it being elevated, at least at a technical level, as a concern. I wondered, as you, as a person that works in the water management district and are involved with these types of rules, do you have any suggestions for the Loxahatchee River Management Coordinating Council on how to interact with the water management district to maybe modify that current practice? If you had any suggestions for us as a council.
Well, I think what it comes down to in reality is how much regional water do we have available that we can send down the river? So that's the thing that's lacking, the freshwater flows to the river. And that's why it's part of the project, the SERP project. The district is proposing to build a 9,500 acre reservoir. That is an absolute huge reservoir. Just to give you an idea, Jonathan Dickinson State Park is about 10,000 acres. So that is a, really big reservoir. So, the idea is to provide more water during the dry season so we can stack it up and store it in the reservoir, and then make those deliveries during the dry season, which is the times that the river needs the water the most. Based on our experience, that's when most of the exceedances and violations occur.
Right, and I guess in the interim, and this is just my perception, is Terry Bates, worked for the Water Management District prior to retirement, obviously, and she always seemed to be kind of an internal champion, if you will, within the South Florida Water Management District for the needs of the river. And I know you can't speak to this because you're not in the operations room or the control room, but I'm wondering I presume that they're aware of the concern that we have about the current operate. I say we, that has been raised within this council. And is there a formal way that we should communicate that concern?
Well, if you want to put it in the stakeholder, feedback letter to us, that would be fine. I mean, if you have a different suggested way of delivering water that's still going to provide, a benefit to the resource, we're all ears to that. But just keep in mind that when this time of the year in particular, when you get around the April, May timeframe before the onset of the wet season, that's when the water resources and the ability to deliver water downstream become less and less practicable. And I'm sure that, you know, you all have coordinated with the city of West Palm Beach as well. And, you know, they also have a competing use from a water supply standpoint to make sure that their you know, public water supply isn't put in danger. And so it's a matter of balancing all those things out. But if the council has some suggestions, we'll certainly elevate that up the chain of command and certainly take that into consideration.
All right. Thank you very much for coming today, Don. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I know that we have a member of the public, Jeremy McBride's had his hand up for a while.
All right, Jeremy, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hey, thanks for letting me talk, and I appreciate the update, Don.
Sure.
The one, a couple things, I guess. I guess a reminder for everybody on the call that the L8 flow equalization basin, you know, was permitted to operate as a multi-purpose reservoir to assist the Loxahatchee River. And so it'd be good, I think, to understand, I think all of us would appreciate hearing, you know, and understanding how that has gone over the past couple of years, just to see, you know, if that's a reliable option between now and when the Loxahatchee SERP project comes online. And then, you know, kind of transitioning to, I think, what's already been discussed as far as the city of West Palm, you know, the Lake Okeechobee system operating manual process right now. I think some stakeholders, as well as the city of West Palm, think that there may be, you know, less regional water available from the lake to make it into grass waters. And so there's a cascade effect there that if the city has less reliability from a regional standpoint to provide to their drinking water system, then they may also have a limited ability to deliver water through the G161. And I think kind of stepping back to the larger context, you know, SERP and the Everglades Restoration Program had at least 7 projects within the county to address, you know, some of the water issues, water resource issues. And so, you know, as you mentioned, SERP was a recovery strategy for the Loxahatchee River, yet, you know, very few of those projects appear to be happening. So, you know, considering, I think, LOSM and the SERP kind of context, I think it's you know, relying on SERP as a recovery strategy moving forward for Loxahatchee River MFL, you know, potentially leaves the rule open to challenge. So, you know, I'd urge you to think about that as you proceed along the way. So thank you again, Jeremy McBride with Palm Beach County.
We also have Marion Hedgepeth. Marion, unmute.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me. Thank you guys and thank you, Don, for the presentation. I just
Sure.
wanted to mention that, you know, the Loxahatchee MFL is a little bit different from the Caloosahatchee. We're talking about Florida's first wild and scenic river. And looking at the monitoring species for the Caloosahatchee, the ichthyoplankton, SAV zooplankton, and possibly a freshwater clam, our key species that we're looking at is bald cypress here, that we're talking about long time growth, seedlings that need specific fresh water and do not need salt water. And we have the mesocosm data that we did with UF to prove that the seedlings are hurt. Reproduction is hurt when salinity gets over 2 parts per thousand. And we're talking about a species that grows very slow. Vallisneria we can't use because it comes and goes in the Loxahatchee, and we haven't figured out why. So our biggie is ball cypress and the upriver movement of white and red mangroves. So it's different. And I think we need this committee who's wants to make things the same around the state to realize that. What other, the Wekiva, does the Wekiva have a MFL? I don't think so.
The Wekiva River?
That,
Um,
yeah, the
yeah.
wild and scenic portion. So
I don't know about the river itself, but I know the spring does.
the spring does, okay.
Yes.
But it just doesn't fit in with our keystone species here. We're having the same problem that the states of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina are having with saltwater intrusion. We're losing our ball cypress. I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Sure.
Herb, did you still want to say something?
Of course. I was just going to ask Don something that has puzzled me now for a number of years, and I keep bringing it up, and I get those looks like, where did he come from? During the beginning of the SERP project for the river and the basin, all of a sudden a permit appeared for, I think it was Seacoast Utility, for an additional 100 CFS, and they were going to be able to stick the pipe right directly in the C-18 canal. And I went to your project manager at that time, who I don't believe even works for the Water Management District anymore, and asked him, why in the world are you giving out 100 CFS to Seacoast Utility when you can't even provide 35 CFS to the river? Well, his first answer was, oh, 100 CFS is nothing. And that's when I asked about, well, okay, why don't we get 35 CFS from the river? You know, why don't we have a pump at the G92 that augments the flow into the river when the flow over the Lanehard Dam drops below 35?
Herb, how long ago was this permit issued to Seacoast Utilities?
Okay, let's see. Well, it was during the first iteration of the group that was going to look at the formation of the plan that was finally adopted. It went for a while, and then there was a stop for about a year or so, and then so I would say it was probably in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I don't have the answers to that, and certainly, you know, I know that the current trend is to try and use more ASR wells along the C-18, where you're getting deeper, using the deeper aquifer that's confined, I suppose. So you're saying that this permit for Seacoast was for surface water from the C-18 canal?
Yep, that's what the permit was for, to allow them to put their pipe directly in the C-18 and withdraw 100 CFS.
Well, certainly that was done before the regional water availability rule went into play or became adopted. But somebody nowadays could not do that because of that regional water availability rule. And that's part of the reason we put that in, is to make sure we could implement all the SERP projects when they come on board. It was a proactive measure on the part of the governing board to make sure that that water is going to be available when all the SERP projects come to fruition. But I don't have an answer for you regarding the specific permit that you're talking about, but I can tell you that there are rules in place now that would prevent that from happening.
Well, I guess my concern is that the current MFL flow-wise isn't being met, and even when it is being met, harm can definitely be done to the river. And without the salinity measure in there, it could be passed by and never even noticed, except that harm is being done.
Yeah, well, keep in mind the timing of that permit that you're talking about for Seacoast was actually before the MFL was adopted for the Northwest Fork of the Loxahatchee River, because that wasn't even adopted until 2003.
Okay, well, that's about the time that, well, I knew it was adopted then. That's why I said, how come we can't get 35 CFF for the river, but you could give Seacoast 100 CFS? So it had to have been adopted at that time.
Yeah, I don't know the timing, but I'll circle back with our regulatory folks and see if I can, find you an answer on that.
Yeah, and in addition to that is the question of how come we can't get a pump at the G92 to pump water into the river when it's there and we need some for the river?
Well, I think the operation folks are trying to, bring water into, they're certainly not going to be discharging that water to tide. So, when the water is available from a regional perspective, we're trying to get it to the river to meet the needs of the river.
Right
We're
now,
certainly not discharging to tide and wasting it.
The problem is not discharging to the river. And the problem, I guess, is there is a weir on G92, so the C18 West has to be at a certain elevation before it can even discharge. I know when we had low lake levels, you folks put pumps all around the lake so you could pump water out of the lake and into the canals for the agricultural people. But we don't seem to be able to get much help for the river.
So you're saying the water is available in the C18 canal, but we're not discharging it for whatever reason.
Yeah, and it may be too low to go over the weir into the through the G92 structure. I don't know specifically. All I know is I haven't seen the C18 West or the C18 dry.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly have a discussion with our ops folks and take a look at that.
Yeah, well, thank you.
I don't see any other hands.
Don, can you get some response to us for our June meeting? Not necessarily a formal presentation, but some sort of a response to what Herb is raising?
Yeah, I'll circle back with the ops staff on the Seacoast issue, or the regulatory staff on the Seacoast issue, and talk with the ops staff and find out, what is the criteria they use. And I'm sure a lot of it is going to be related to what's available from a regional water perspective, but I'll certainly check with them.
I would appreciate that. And can you clarify something you said, or at least I think you said that the city of West Palm Beach has been trying to get more water to the Northwest Fork. Did I understand you to say that?
Yeah, I mean, they've been working with district operations staff to try and get more water. And Aubrey sent an email out recently acknowledging that they're trying to work cooperatively with the city of West Palm Beach to try and get more water through the G161 and G160 structures to get it into the Northwest Fork.
During the dry season, they've been attempting that?
As far as I know, but again, I'm not in on the details of what's going on in the discussions that have occurred in the past on that, but that's my understanding in the email that I saw from Aubrey and some of the discussions that I've heard a little bit internally. But again, like I said before, a lot of that is really dependent upon the regional water that's available. whether it's the city of West Palm Beach or the district trying to get water to the river is really dependent upon what's available.
All right, does any other council member have any question or comment? All right, is there a motion to make a recommendation among those three options or any fourth option you may have? If there is no motion, then I suggest that we pass this on to the June meeting to give us further consideration. Is there a motion to be presented to the council? Last call for a motion.
I'd be happy to make a motion, but it sounded like most of the council wanted more time to look at this.
With these Zoom meetings, it is very difficult to kind of get a sense as to where the members are without being able to look at them. I, for one, or I, like Herb, am disinclined to make any suggested changes at this point, but I don't have a sense as to what everybody else wants to do. Anybody else want to speak up?
This is Chad Kennedy with DEP.
Yes.
I would suggest that we let Don go back to the Water Management District and bring us back to the items that he mentioned for the next meeting and elevate this. I'd like to have representation from the Loxahatchee River District that has all the facts and figures regarding the MFL violations and available to speak more to the technical aspects of this item.
Chad, thank you. Does any council member have an objection to what Chad Kennedy just suggested? Does any council member have an objection to what was just suggested?
This is Don. Just a comment on Chad's suggestion, and that is, I can make this presentation available to you all. And my thought was to address Herb's comment was to try and communicate that back through Kathy La Martina after I've had the opportunity to coordinate with the regulatory and operations staff, and I can send an email to that effect on the findings. I don't know that there's really a need to come back and present what can be given in an email to the council.
Kathy, let me ask you a question. Are we having on the June agenda a discussion about consumptive uses and permitting?
I am trying to get somebody that can come to the meeting.
Okay, so that's still an open subject. Okay, that's good. What's the pleasure of the council? Chad is suggesting that once the information comes back to us, that we ask somebody from water management to appear again. As I understand it, Don is things that can be done through a written email. What's the pleasure of the council?
Tom, this is Jonathan. I'd like to see Don come back. I think the information's critical. And if we really want to participate, there may be some questions remaining. I think it would be great to have Don there to be able to answer them so that we could make an informed decision.
And this is Tom Reinert. I agree with Jonathan.
Don, can we work that out?
I can be there if y'all need me.
Thank you. And Don, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome. If you don't need anything else in the meantime, feel free to give me an email. I'll give you, Kathy can give you my my contact information, and I'll send this presentation to the council through Kathy as well. Okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the 4E pollution reduction plan proposed project discussion. Aubrey was going to give us that presentation, and I don't believe he's available.
Correct. I think we'll have to defer that.
Okay, what I would like to do, just remind the council that the reason I asked that we get into this kind of a discussion is because I think that with the wealth of information of the committee, council members, that you guys can give some guidance to some of the other agencies as what you think would be possibly viable plans to reduce the nutrient load. And that's what I was kind of hoping we would get into a discussion on. So we'll probably try to do that in June again. So if you can think of anything that an agency could or should be doing, go ahead and bring that up at the next meeting. All right, item 5C, Loxahatchee River plans, goals and objectives. Justin, are you available?
I am.
Thank you. Take it away.
Yes, sir. And much to your point about the 4E pollution reduction discussion, that's what we were hoping to have here also, is just a discussion on our existing objectives that are in the 2010 plan, review those, to try to determine if we want to keep these objectives, amend them, or replace them. And then also looking at the strategies and the identified tasks that are in the 2010 plan in preparation or for the 2020 plan. Let me go through and share my screen if I'm allowed. Let's see. So Devon, do you need to switch screens for us?
Kathy, oh, there you go. Now you'll be able to do it, Justin.
Okay. If I can find the right one. All right, are we looking at the plan objectives implementation from the management plan? The
No,
Need
no,
to
we
hit
don't.
share. Justin, we don't see it yet. Okay, now we do.
okay, yeah, one more
All right.
click and I got there. The I'm not sure if we sent this out, if anybody has put this on their front burner to review, but I would like the council, and I believe it's the onus of the council to develop these objectives and working with the other stakeholder groups, identifying strategies and tasks. If we look at this first objective, it's preserve and enhance rivers' unique natural and cultural values. We have identified several strategies to meet that objective with tasks also. But I'm actually going to skip that right now and get to objective 2, just because it ties in well with what Don was bringing in and his presentation, and restore the river's historic hydrologic regime and reverse the deleterious saltwater intrusion. And I am curious, I am going to skip over to objective 2 here in the existing plan, and looking at the identified strategies. 1, improve the quality, quantity, timing, and distribution of flows in the Northwest Fork. Obviously, this is part of the management of the Loxahatchee River. It has been out there. It's been on our radar. And with that, we're going through these motions to develop this management plan, the restoration plan rather, and with these projects identified. Let's see, restore and or replace a natural water storage and conveyance to the Northwest Fork. So with these tasks, I believe a lot of these, or a lot of this objective can be met through the projects that are identified, flow 1, 2, and 3 from Don's presentation. But what I'm really going to ask the council is, does anyone out there feel strongly one way or the other, or have some other suggestions for this objective? or within this objective, identifying specific tasks. I believe we should have this discussion, go out there, if we need to go back to our agencies and come back and have, my suggestion to Aubrey last meeting was to have a workshop specifically to go over the plan, goals and objectives. So these are the two tasks: improve the quantity, quality, timing, and distribution of flows in Northwest Fork, and then restore and or replace natural water storage and conveyance to Northwest Fork. I believe most of this can be achieved through those projects. I'm going to go back now to objective 1 and ask the council, does anyone out there have any objections to the existing objectives and any suggestions for amendments, alterations, new objectives to the 2020 plan?
This is Chad Kennedy, DEP. Justin, I'm just trying to understand. So the two objectives in bold, your question is, does any council member think that we need to modify these two objectives?
Yes, really looking at this is I think the council's role in the development of a management plan is really the development of objectives. And then, so it's making time, having the council make the time to review the existing objectives. Have we met them? And should we, in the future plan, the 2020 plan, have different objectives? Have we seen, should we keep these the way they are, or should we change them? And then if we want to keep them, what do we want to change any of the strategies? And I just thought it was timely that Don's presentation just overlapped pretty well with objective 2.
Well,
So yes, to answer your question, does anyone have any suggestions for new objectives or want to see?
This is Martin County. We don't think the primary objectives, the bolded type things, need any changes. The changes we think would be under the more detailed, the strategies, things of that nature.
and I think DEP would concur with Martin County.
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Looking at this, it's all very logical. It's all going to come through the SERP project, but that's the problem. The SERP project is, well, I wish I knew how many years in the future before it begins construction. And it would think that we ought to have some strategy for maybe improving the flows that we were talking about just a few minutes ago. In the interim, there's nothing, that's going to improve the flows to the river on an interim basis included. Everything is put off until it seems like 4, 6 years. Who knows? And it seems to me there ought to be something in here for the interim in, maybe the use of pumps or whatnot, whether we just talked about it before, to get additional water to the river. Like I said, I don't think I've ever seen the C18 or the C18 West dry.
There's also a lot that can be done at the local government level, which, if need be, can be included in this plan. But Palm Beach County and Martin County are working on restoration strategies that are related to SERP, but are not things that are actually in the SERP plan.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that would be good to bring to a workshop, identifying specific projects that we can put in the plan. And I agree, if there are other options out there, smaller local options, and we can put it in there and help to meet some of the objectives. I certainly believe that we should have this discussion and put them in the plan, incorporating as well the larger SERP projects.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about the really big stuff, like thinking that those things can happen outside of SERP would be pretty, I'm trying to think of the word, optimistic, or probably not feasible. So, but you know, there are low-hanging fruit that are still out there that could be done to help restore flows to the river in the interim.
Mr. Chairman, in answer to the gentleman's question, I think the people most expertise at being able to determine methods and means to get more river water flowing is the Water Management District. You the folks have control of all the weirs and pumps and all that kind of thing. And I would like to see a sincere effort by the Water Management District is trying to come up with additional water for the river before 4, 6, 8 years, who knows, before we get started on these major SERP projects. Thank you.
Deb Drum has her hand up. Deb, unmute.
Yeah, it took a second. It was a little delayed. Thank you. I want to agree with Herb and Martin County's comments on this. Justin, I do think that there's more to be said in terms of the strategies. The objectives seem fine, but when you get into the more detail, especially when you're talking about SERP being your remedy, there's just such a delay on the funding for that we should be looking more interim as to what can be done. And I agree with Herb's comments about having a good detailed discussion with the Water Management District on what they might do in the interim. And it might be something that they could eventually claim some cost share credit and SERP for. Thank you.
So then I'm curious, is this something we should identify to put into the plan, just an effort, make an effort with between stakeholders, all stakeholders, to identify smaller projects that may be implemented?
And would it be possible to have like a stakeholder meeting where you don't have to have just people on the council able to speak? Because it's going to come from, you know, this kind of level of detail is probably going to come from staff rather than from elected officials or, you know, people.
Well, I think the desire was just to have a workshop and a public workshop at that, just talk about goals and objectives for the 2020 plan. And here, really, it's making the time to put it on the front burner, say, okay, let's think about these. Let's go back to the house. And then let's schedule, which I think, Kathy, we were planning on doing was, and that's why Tom brought it up, was having an April workshop just to discuss the management plan.
Justin, do you feel that the Water Management District can come to us and give us specific projects that could be implemented before SERP?
I can't entirely speak to that. There may be some smaller projects out there, but I believe our efforts are in the design, plan and design of the SERP projects. And that's, if there are others out there who see opportunities, given the opportunity to bring them to the table and We may have some smaller restoration projects on Moonshine Creek area or Cypress Creek, but we wouldn't necessarily have the data to show what kind of storage or any flow reduction or increases from projects on there.
Well, who could speak to the possibility or the usefulness of pumps in the C18 that Herb was discussing?
We can certainly do that, and much to Don's point, the district is trying to make the most with what little water is there, and operations and water managers can certainly speak to that point of the strategy behind pulse flows and the inability to put a pump there to dewater the C18.
All right, so we should get that in the June meeting.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Justin, are you looking for this? Chad Kennedy with DEP. Are you looking for a motion right now to go ahead and schedule the workshop? Would the Water Management District be willing to facilitate that workshop if we do vote to have one?
I believe if we have a special workshop like we've had with the 4E rules, just run it through the same process that we're doing now. Are you suggesting some other method, some other form, a workshop through the district? I guess
No,
I'm not
I'm
following
actually, I was gonna offer that we offer a motion that we do have a workshop to discuss the strategies listed in the 2010 version, and if nothing else, update them and potentially add new strategies to achieve the two goals that are listed.
Chad, is that a motion?
Yes, sir.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
All right, any discussion on the motion?
Wait now.
I do have some discussion. This is Kathy. I am not available in April. I have so many meetings going on right now. So Justin, are you able, is your group able to take this workshop and run with it?
No, we are not. We'll have to look at a calendar then and see if we can identify a time that would work for all or most.
Kathy, this is Ann. Someone seconded that motion from Chad, but I didn't catch the name.
That's Justin.
It is Justin Nolte.
Okay, and he is able to, he is part of the members?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
he's a member.
Okay. I wasn't aware of that. Justin, what I recall from back in 2010 was that we put together a spreadsheet and each agency listed out what they were going to be able to do to help the river. I don't know if it ended up as an appendix or something in the back, but it would be nice to update that and see what has been accomplished since 2010, even though we know that the CERT projects have not come to fruition just yet, but it's important to recognize that they do have a signed NEPA document and there are discussions about funding it. So maybe we need to dig up that old spreadsheet to see what all the agencies have accomplished over the last 10 years, 11 years.
Yeah, I agree.
Actually, this is Kathy. I send that out. I didn't send it out this month. I think I forgot, but I usually send it out before every meeting so that if there are changes that the entities can let me know and I can update it. But I do have that spreadsheet, just so you know.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen that.
Yeah.
And we have that. And this, just seeing this on today's agenda, putting it on the council's radar that we need to think about these objectives, strategies and tasks and bring them to a future workshop.
Okay, and I think, Chad, was your question about whether the water management district could take the lead on the workshop? Was that for getting water management district to come up with the logistics and the meeting place and setting up Zoom and
Yes,
things
it
like
was.
that? Okay.
Yes, because historically, the water management district's been the one that, does the administrative type work associated with the Loxahatchee River Management Council. So that was mine. And I know there's 1,500 some odd employees at the South Florida Water Management District. So I'm hoping that, somebody can, if Kathy's not available, we can get somebody else. And it does seem like Barbara would be interested, and it would help give her guidance because she's authoring this document. And it seems like she would at least want to be at even if she's not facilitating a workshop, be there to kind of hear how things have changed, so that she can update the document.
Yeah, absolutely. And she would be involved with it. So Kathy, do you have your schedule there? Can we hammer out a date?
Are you talking to me?
I am.
Well, I'm not. I mean, I'm kind of on Zoom right now, and I can't really look at my, We could talk offline, and I can email everybody if that's what you'd like to do.
Chad, would you entertain amending your motion that the coordinating council will have a workshop meeting in either April or May, depending upon when the Water Management District can make themselves available to basically sponsor it?
Yes.
Would a second accept that amendment?
I would.
Any more discussion on the motion? Any more discussion on the motion?
Well, there's do we have the public talk or after?
Technically, no, but I'm fine with it. If the member of the public wants to say something to the motion.
Okay, yes, Suzanne Metzler.
Hi.
Can you unmute? Suzanne? You need to unmute. I don't know what happened to her.
Okay, well, technically, once the motion is made, I don't know. In any event, how do we want to do this? I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but we're going to give it a shot. Instead of making Kathy go down the whole list, does any council member object to the motion to have a workshop meeting in April or May? And that the date depends upon the availability of the water management district personnel to basically sponsor and coordinate the meeting. Does any council member object to it? One last call. Any council member object to it? I will deem the motion as having carried. So let's see what we can do about getting a meeting set up for April or May and shoot out the notice to everybody. And if you're asked which date you prefer, we should make an attempt to help Kathy out by getting a response to her. Justin, do you have anything further at this point?
I do. I would ask the council and all stakeholders to review the existing objectives, strategies, tasks, as well as a spreadsheet that Kathy supplies. Update those projects, and then identify, think about what potential amendments to it, changes, additions, and that'd be it.
All right, thank you, Justin.
If I may, Mr. Chair, Chad Kennedy, DEP
Yes.
again. I did want to speak to Herb's comment about the water management district having control over the water resources. And Herb, you're absolutely right on that. But the council was developed to provide guidance to the department, DEP, and the water management district. So I'm hoping that some of the other members can bring things to our two agencies, as Martin County mentioned earlier, that are more local activities. And even Mike Dillon, I'll put you on the spot. The water management, you're close to the river and have the drainage system for Jupiter Farms in that area. And maybe there's some small tweaks that can be made. I don't know. But those are the type of things I think that maybe we do have more control over, that we can discuss as part of these strategies. So.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Herb. While we were imposing on Justin, I would like to do that a little more. We talked earlier about all the land that was being accumulated and has been accumulated. And we specifically mentioned this huge water reservoir area. Now, it previously had pumps in and pumps out. And I know there might be questions about maybe water quality. I don't know. I haven't seen any data on that. But I think one of the things I'd like the Water Management District to discuss with us is the potential for using all this land to at least store some water during the wet season that will have additional water stored and dedicated specifically to the MFL for the river during the dry season.
Now, which lands are you referring to?
Lands that you already own because
Okay.
you've already purchased it, like the Mecca Farms.
Right. And those are also identified, and we'll see once you get Don's presentation. Those lands are all identified in there, and the projects associated with those lands.
Yeah, I know that.
Identified.
But what I'm asking you to do is have the South Water Management District look at how you can potentially use them before there is a SERP project that's going to use them to augment supplies for the river. I mean, the reservoir, someone was just talking about the huge size of the reservoir. Well, what if we could store some water in there during the wet season and dribble that out during the dry season and try to meet the MFL? I mean, any additional storage that we have available, we ought to be using when we can see we're not meeting the MFL at all. And that seems like intermediate strategy that we ought to be considering seriously.
Yeah, and the district would have no problem presenting the projects that we've already undertaken to meet those. And if we see any other low-hanging fruit, as Chad might say, and that we have in the works or have already completed.
Okay, thank you.
Or that are possible.
Yes.
Correct. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. So you would envision presenting that at the workshop meeting in April or May?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, we could.
All right, Justin, do you have anything further?
No, sir.
Thank you very much.
Greg Braun has his hand up.
Okay.
Greg? Talk, Greg, you're unmuted. We can't hear you.
Greg, you can try selecting another device as your microphone. That's probably what it is.
Oh, I think you had it.
Yes, Kathy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the comments that were submitted back in September on behalf of the conservation community groups in Martin County were received and have gotten to either Barbara or Justin or whomever the appropriate person is.
If you sent them to Barbara, I don't know, I don't know if she received them.
No, I sent them to you.
Oh, if you sent them to me, I sent them to Barbara.
Okay, very good. That's all I needed. Thank you. We made a number of suggestions for specifics related to land acquisition and conservation within the Loxahatchee headwaters area, the project that the coordinating council has endorsed. Thank you.
I don't see any other hands. Tom?
Yes. Sorry, I had to take an emergency call. Can you hear me, Kathy?
Yeah, we're just going on to the next agenda item.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. Bud, can you make a presentation on the MFL status? If not, we'll just go to the water quality.
I'd be glad to. Thanks. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. If I can, I'll just share my screen real quickly here. Kathy, if you can accept that. Just give it a second to sync up here. All right. Can everybody see our homepage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Bud Howard, Loxahatchee River District. Just wanted to take a few minutes. One advantage to these Zoom meetings is we get a lot of participation. Wanted to share with you some MFL information that we compile and touch on water quality. And so everything that I'm talking about here is served out to the public. Our website is loxahatcheeriver.org, or you can simplify that by LRECD for Loxahatchee River Environmental Control District.org. And this prominent button here under protecting the river is the section that has everything that we're talking about here. There's the minimum flow and level stuff. There's a link here to a page that I'm going to show you. And then this new water quality scorecard kind of condenses a lot of the water quality data for everyone. So the first one, if you click on the MFL tool here, we create this tool where we go out and grab data from USGS each night and allow everyone to stay tuned in to what's happening with flows and salinity in the river. And in this top panel, we have the Lanehart Dam flows. And so kind of track along here, we're trying to keep flows of above the minimum of 35 CFS. Remember, technically, we're not violating the MFL unless we do 20 consecutive days of that. So you can see this year we're doing pretty well. We only had a few days where it dipped below the 35 CFS, and then operationally things are going differently this year than in the previous several years. and flows are up above 35 CFS. On the bottom panel here, we're grabbing the data from the River Mile 9.1 water quality station. And the teal line here shows the salinity measurements as an average between the top and the bottom instruments. And then the black line there is the 20-day rolling average. So again, back to the rolling average going above 2 parts per thousand. Last week, we had some high seas and wind conditions, I think, that were helping to kind of push saltwater, marine water up into the river. And so we did see a spike in the salinity. You can hover on over the data points, and it was touching, the daily average was touching at just over 9 parts per thousand. So that's driving now the 20-day rolling average to just below 2. I think I've got a rounding here function going. So we're at like 1.98, 1.99, and those are rounding up to give us a MFL violation. So probably after the meeting, if it's the pleasure of the council, I'll change that rounding so that we actually take it down to, I guess, the 10th or the 100th of a PSU, so that we don't have technically anything above 2 at this point. So anyway, it's a nice tool. This updates automatically every night. And then there's these date sliders up here where you can actually go back and look at some data in time. And you can see how operationally water management in the past, and I think it kind of was born out of the restoration work at the Lanehart and Maston dams, where they were pulling flows back during the week, but then releasing it during the weekends. And then that created this kind of oscillation in the flows that then translated into oftentimes salinity violations. And so you can see that this was last year, and then all the way over here on the right side, these are actually the flows for this year, and we're out of that oscillation. So hats off to water management and others that are able to keep that new operation protocol in place. Real briefly, I wanted to touch on a couple things. This year, obviously, it's very dry. I'll just show this real quickly for the benefit of everyone. We have the Jupiter Inlet here, northwest fork of the river, comes all the way around, works its way back, comes up through Riverbend Park, G92 water control structure here. Then we have G160, the C18 canal continues south and then enters it, joins up with Grassy Waters Preserve and the G161. So for those not familiar, this is kind of a layout of everything here. So obviously the flow coming through these 2 water control structures is key. City of West Palm Beach manages Grassy Waters Preserve for, which is a key part of their drinking water supply. And so it's work between water management, the City of West Palm Beach, and I think DEP is often at the table on figuring out ways to get water moving to the river whenever it's possible. And so here we got North Lake Boulevard. This is the intersection where the Grassy Water Preserve joins into the C18. And you can see that as of, it looks like about shortly after February, flows are indeed coming out of G161 and helping to supplement flows to the river. So again, tip of the hat to all the parties involved that are making this happen this year. Just for comparison, I'm going ahead and showing the G160, also flow coming through there in February, which no doubt, if we didn't have those flows, our current situation would be very different with regard to MFLs and salinity violations. So what I've done this morning, I wanted to try to add that G160 and 161 data. So I set up a thing to go grab those page selectors down in the middle here. If you go to the second page, it'll give you a chance to kind of see that data. These time sliders synchronize. So if we just look at this year so far, there's a strange data point that came in over the weekend. I expect that'll probably get cleaned up overnight, but you get the idea. Here's a way to be able to see flow at 160 and 161 and at a couple mouse clicks. So moving on to water quality, unless we want to do some questions on that part of it, whatever is the pleasure. Let me jump over to water quality real quickly. So there's the new water quality dashboard. This was born out of one of our governing board members' suggestion. And what we've tried to do is just really consolidate all of our water quality data for at a glance look. So top level, how is all the water quality data scoring with regard to nitrogen, phosphorus, chlorophyll, and bacteria? February was actually a really good month. The next level down, we look at the scorecards for each of those, and those are all looking pretty good except for our very stringent chlorophyll criteria. And then if you're interested, scroll on down the page, we have stoplight maps to be able to color code each of the respective areas or water quality sites. We've got maps that show the proportion of samples that pass or fail to meet the water quality criteria for each site as established by DEP and EPA and the numeric nutrient criteria. And then on the bottom of the page is the second half of the water quality table that just gives you a little bit of a historical perspective where you can see the previous months. All this information updates each night as data is released from our QA/QC process in the lab. And so you can see our nitrogen analysis is complete and been released. And so that's why we have some data for March already in here. So just a few things I wanted to pass along, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions for you.
Hey, Bud, this is Gary Ritter.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. Remind me what the on your water quality, what the percentages mean. So you had, I think, on the top, like that 84% overall.
Right.
Good. What does that mean again?
So that's the proportion of samples that meet the water quality criteria. In most cases, it's the numeric nutrient criteria or the DEP surface water criteria. And so it's a bit arbitrary in the sense that, you know, well, how come we didn't use 75% as being green? But the criteria is shown there in the lower left as far as our color coding. And my thought being on that is that we have enough sampling sites. Typically it's, you know, 20 or even 30 sites that we're visiting, that those sites that we're sampling that is part of special projects to try to understand what's going on in a specific area get diluted by the fact that we have so many sites that are long-term sites, and it's a nice representation of the watershed. So we feel like it's a fair assessment to at least give you a arm's length view of how things are looking in the river.
Thanks, Bud.
Sure.
Bud, this is
Yep.
Herb.
Hi.
This is a question I'm going to ask you, and I've asked you this and Aubrey a number of times before, but I guess I'm going to keep asking it. I noticed that the data that you provided on 160, 161 was interesting, but I'm not sure its relevance to the river. There are a lot of well-filled demands that draw water out of the C18 canal in that region between those between those structures. Seacoast has a lot of wells that are drawing groundwater out of the canal and into their well fields because they had a tremendous amount of impact on the wetlands that were there. Anyway, while that is interesting to see how much water is going there, it would, to me, be even more interesting to see how much of that water that gets put through those structures actually goes to the river. And I've always wanted to see data on the G92 flows, because we know that water then is going to the river. And we've never had it. Is that because there is no measurement, no way of measuring the water going through G92 at the present time?
So I can tell you that I apologize for that. I don't remember that request. I'm reasonably confident I can get that for you. And if I can get it, I'll have it up on that second page of that form by the end of the day, because it's pretty readily available. I'm able to mine the data out of the DB Hydro database. And so I'll just make it another panel on this, and so we can actually track that.
Oh, that would be excellent, because that tells us exactly how the operational system is affecting the river directly.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Bud?
Chad Kennedy, DEP. Bud, you didn't mention anything coming in from the C18 West, which it comes in kind of, I guess, bypasses those two structures, but it's just a spillway. Just for the folks that might not be familiar with that canal system. I don't know if you can show on a map.
Yeah, that's a good point. That would be shown here. So here's the west leg. So I see here in DB Hydro has a flow measurement there, it looks like. So I'll peek into that data too, and maybe we'll have the catch-all system to be able to see what the flows are coming into the C18.
But I also did want to say, I'm glad to hear some good news as far as the flows, not just pulsing on the weekend. It looks like, I don't know who brought that together and made it work, but they should get at least a thank you.
No doubt, no doubt.
Any other questions for Bud? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Does any member have any issues they would like to bring up? Any council members have anything to add under 7A through E? Is there any other matters coming before the council? Any other matters coming before the council? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn with the understanding that we will have a workshop meeting in April or May.
So
This-
moved.
It's Tom Reinert, second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Well, anybody object to the motion? Any council member object to the motion to adjourn? Thank you, everybody. And Devon, thank you again.
No problem. Have a great day, everyone.